On the day my father was buried, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not a single soul bothered to knock on my door or let me know when they were leaving. I only found out the funeral had already happened when I walked into the living room and saw the black suits returning, my mother dabbing at carefully rehearsed tears. Her eyes met mine, and all she said was, "It wasn't your place to be there today, Ryan." I stood there paralyzed, disbelief tearing through my chest. No final goodbye, no chance to touch the casket, to whisper things I never got to say. My mother had taken that from me as easily as taking a glass from a table. My brothers, Mark and David, walked past me as if I were a ghost, an inconvenience too awkward to acknowledge. There was no argument, no explanation, just their shared silence. The Upper East Side townhouse where I grew up suddenly felt like a foreign place. The walls that had witnessed my childhood now seemed to hold secrets, whispers I couldn't decipher. The smell of the strong coffee my father always drank still lingered in the kitchen. Mr. Abernathy, our butler for over 20 years, gave me a look of pity, but quickly averted his gaze when my mother entered the room. That night, I sat alone, in my room, staring at the only photograph I had of my father and me, taken when I was 10, at the beach in the Hamptons, where we used to spend every August. I remembered how his hands always smelled of pine and tobacco, how he taught me to fish on those foggy mornings, how he always said I was an improved version of himself. I whispered an apology into the dark, promising him I would find a way to make things right. And in that promise, something inside me shifted. I spent the night replaying the last few months. Dad, Charles Sterling, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer nearly a year ago. At first, we all rallied around him, but as the months wore on and he grew weaker, I was the only one who remained. While my mother, Eleanor, spent more time with her friends at the country club and my brothers tended to their own lives in the city, I left my job at the construction firm to be with him. "You don't have to do this, son," he'd say, always worried about me even on the brink of death. But I had to. He was my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike in Central Park on a Sunday morning, who took me to my first Yankees game, who secretly cried when I graduated with my engineering degree. The nights were the worst. He struggled to breathe, and I would often stay awake, sitting by his bed just to make sure he was still breathing. Sometimes, between medications, he would tell stories of his childhood in upstate New York, of how he came to the city with just a suitcase and a dream. "I built all of this from nothing," he'd whisper, looking out the window at the mansions, gardens. My mother would appear occasionally, always too perfumed, always in a hurry. "I can't stand to see him like this," she'd justify, but I knew there was more to it. Their marriage had grown cold years ago, held together only by appearances and the financial comfort my father provided. Mark and David would call occasionally, but visits were rare, always marked by impatient glances at their watches. In the final week, when the doctors said it was a matter of days, I spent every moment by his side. One night, as I was adjusting his pillow, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Ryan," he said, his voice a thread, "you're the only one who stayed, the only one who saw the man, not the money." I didn't fully understand what he meant then. I thought it was just the morphine talking, and then he was gone. On a cold June dawn, while New York slept under a fine, typical city drizzle, I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. I called my mother immediately, but she didn't answer. I texted my brothers, but only received short replies hours later. When they finally arrived, everything changed. My mother took complete control, dealing with the hospital, the funeral home. My opinions were ignored, my suggestions dismissed. "You've done your part," she said, with that cold smile she always used when she wanted to belittle me. "Now let the family handle the rest." Family, as if I wasn't part of it, as if the months I spent by my father's side, wiping his sweat, helping him walk when his legs failed, listening to his repeated stories because he forgot he'd already told them, as if all that meant nothing. And then came the day of the funeral. Or rather, the day I discovered the funeral had already happened, a private event according to my mother. Just for the immediate family, she explained, as if I were a mere stranger. The anger rose in my throat like acid, but my father's voice echoed in my mind. Keep your calm when the world turns its back on you. Dignity is the last thing they can take from a man. So I swallowed my anger and retreated to my room. The same room where I grew up, where my father used to tell me stories before bed. I looked at the photo of us at his sincere smile, and I promised that somehow I would make things right. Not for revenge, but for justice. Because my father deserved more than to be reduced to an inheritance, to be fought over. He deserved to be remembered as the man he was. Flawed, yes, but genuine in his love. The next evening, my mother and my 2 brothers gathered in the study for the reading of the will. The door was already half closed when I approached, but I could hear laughter from within. Too loud, too light for a moment steeped in grief. When I reached the door, my mother stood up, blocking it with her arms crossed and that permanent smile she had perfected since I was a boy. This meeting is only for family members mentioned in the will, she said, her voice like frost. My brothers didn't even look at me. She turned and closed the door, leaving me staring at the polished wood, the handle still trembling from her touch. I didn't knock again. I didn't raise my voice or argue. Instead, I walked away, calm and quiet, just as my father had taught me to be when the world turned cruel. I went to my desk, opened the drawer, and took out the documents I had kept hidden for weeks. The truth I had been waiting to reveal. I placed them in a simple envelope and walked back down the hall. When the door opened again and I saw her smug expression, I said nothing. I just handed the papers to the lawyer and waited. Mr. Davison, a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses who had worked for our family for decades, was the kind of lawyer who inspired instant trust. He had known me since I was a child and had always treated me with respect. Tonight, however, his professionalism was being tested. I could see the discomfort in his posture as my mother treated him like a mere messenger. "Oh, Ryan, what a shame you missed the main event," my mother said when she saw me standing in the hallway after the meeting. She was wearing that strong, French perfume my father secretly detested. "But don't worry, your father left you a small allowance, nothing significant of course, but enough for you to continue, well, whatever it is you do." Mark and David stood behind her, both wearing that look of superiority they had perfected over the years. Mark, the eldest, had been running a part of my father's business for a few years, though we all knew he spent more time at the New York Athletic Club than in the office. David, the middle child, had started his own digital marketing firm with Dad's money, a firm that conveniently provided overpriced services to the family companies. "We're celebrating it per se later," David commented, walking past me as if I were invisible. "You won't believe what the old man left us." The old man. That's how they referred to our father when they thought no one was listening. To them, Charles Sterling was just a source of income, an obstacle that had finally been removed. I took a deep breath, remembering my father's advice again. "Patience is the virtue of the strong, Ryan. Wait for the right moment and make your move with precision." The moment had come. I held out the envelope to Mr. Davison, who took it with a confused expression. "What is this?" my mother asked, her tone instantly shifting from triumphant to suspicious. "Something your husband wanted to be considered," I replied calmly. Mr. Davison opened the envelope without a word, expecting some trivial protest. But as he unfolded the first page, the color visibly drained from his face. His lips parted as he scanned the documents, his eyes racing over the lines like someone reading a death sentence. My mother noticed the change first. "What is it?" she demanded, taking a step forward. The room fell silent. My brothers leaned in. The lawyer read the heading aloud. "Amended Last Will and Testament of Charles Sterling. Dated 3 weeks before his death. Fully notarized. With my name on the first page." During those last few weeks while I cared for my father, we had talked a lot about the future. He knew what was happening in the family. He wasn't naive. One night as I was helping him with his medication, he confessed, "They think I'm blind, Ryan. They think I don't see how they only show up when they need money, how your mother only visits when she wants a new piece of jewelry or a trip." I didn't say anything then, just held his hand. But he continued, "I've been watching for years. Mark siphoning money from the companies. David using our infrastructure for his own benefit. Your mother? Well, your mother stopped loving me a long time ago, if she ever did." I tried to argue, to say he was being too harsh, but he cut me off. "No, son. I'm dying. I can no longer afford comfortable lies. The truth is, I allowed this. I allowed them to become this way, always giving everything without demanding responsibility." It was that same night that he mentioned his plan. "I'm going to fix this, Ryan. Not for me. It's too late for me. But for you, and for the legacy I built. I don't want everything I worked for to be squandered by those who value nothing but money." 2 weeks later, he asked me to drive him to a notary's office downtown. He was weak, but determined. I waited in the car while he, leaning on his cane and accompanied by his personal assistant, went into the building. An hour later, he returned with a sealed envelope. "Keep this," he said. "Open it only after I'm gone and only if you have to." His eyes held a mixture of sadness and resolve. I kept the envelope as he asked, without asking questions. Part of me hoped I would never have to open it, that somehow my family would find decency after his death. But I knew them all too well to truly believe that. And now here I was, watching Mr. Davison's face as he absorbed the contents of the document I had just handed him. He glanced at me briefly, as if confirming something he had always suspected. My mother, impatient, snatched the papers from his hands. "This can't be real," she whispered, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. "This is fraud. You forced Charles to sign this when he was doped up on morphine." Mark took the papers from her and started reading, his face shifting from confusion to anger. David remained frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Everything is in order," Mr. Davison said, regaining his professional composure. "I recognize Mr. Sterling's signature, and the document was duly registered and authenticated." "This is impossible," my mother insisted, her voice rising an octave. "Charles would never do this to us. You must have manipulated him, Ryan. You were always his favorite, always manipulating, always—" "Eleanor," Mr. Davison interrupted her firmly, something he rarely did. "The document is legitimate, and there's more." He turned to me, holding out his hand. "Do you have the flash drive mentioned here?" I nodded and handed him the small device that was also in the envelope my father had given me. Mr. Davison took out his laptop, inserted the drive, and after a few moments, turned the screen for everyone to see. There was my father, sitting in his favorite armchair, visibly weak but with clear eyes and a firm voice. The date appeared in the corner of the screen, exactly 3 weeks before his death. I, Charles Sterling, being of sound mind and body, make this recording as an additional testament to my will, as expressed in the revised testament dated today. The room fell into a sepulchral silence as my father, from beyond the grave, explained his decisions. The inheritance, the companies, the house, everything had been reorganized. I wasn't the sole beneficiary, but I now had majority control over almost everything. My brothers and my mother would receive a monthly income, but control of the business and the estate would be in my hands. When the video ended, my mother was sitting down, looking as if she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Mark punched the wall, a loud thud echoing through the house. David just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. The lawyer picked up the envelope without a word, expecting some trivial protest. But as he unfolded the first page, the color visibly drained from his face. His lips parted as he scanned the documents, his eyes racing over the lines like someone reading a death sentence. My mother noticed the change first. "What is it?" she demanded, taking a step forward. The room fell silent. My brothers leaned in. The lawyer read the heading aloud. Amended Last Will and Testament of Charles Sterling. Dated 3 weeks before his death. Fully notarized. With my name on the first page. My mother lunged for the pages, but the lawyer stepped back. This supersedes everything," he said. Then, with a stunned sigh, he added, "We've lost." The words echoed in the room like thunder. My brothers stared at her. She stood there, mouth slightly agape, all her posture gone like ash in the wind. It was over. The empire she had tried to steal had slipped through her fingers. Mr. Davison cleared his throat, trying to regain his professional composure. His eyes, from behind their thick-rimmed glasses, avoided direct contact with any of us. 20 years serving the Sterling family, and now he found himself at the epicenter of a family earthquake. "I need everyone to sit down," he said finally. "The document I hold in my hands is legally binding and completely supersedes the will we just read." "This is ridiculous," Mark exploded, his face red with anger. He always had that explosive temper ever since he was a kid. "This document is obviously fraudulent. Dad would never do this to us. Ryan must have manipulated him when he was weak, sick. The document is duly registered with the New York County Clerk's office," Mr. Davison interrupted, his voice now firm. "The signature was witnessed and notarized by 2 individuals unrelated to the family, and more importantly, there is a supplementary video." My mother, who until that moment had seemed petrified, finally found her voice. "Video? What video?" Her tone was a mix of desperation and disbelief. Without a word, I took the flash drive my father had given me from my pocket and placed it on the table. Mr. Davison picked it up, connected it to his laptop, and turned the screen for everyone to see. The image of my father appeared, sitting in his favorite armchair at his country house in the Catskills. He was visibly weakened by the illness, but his eyes had that clarity and determination I knew so well. The date in the bottom corner of the screen left no doubt, 3 weeks before his death. "I, Charles Sterling," my father began, his voice surprisingly firm, "being of sound mind and body, am recording this video as a testament to my last will, as expressed in the revised and signed testament of today." He paused, took a sip of water, and continued. "During the last months of my life I have had a great deal of time to reflect on what I have built and, more importantly, on what truly matters. I realized that my greatest failure was not seeing what was happening right under my nose." At that moment, the camera zoomed in slightly on his face, capturing the mixture of sadness and resolution in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, addressing my mother directly, "for the last 15 years of our marriage you have grown increasingly distant. I don't blame you entirely. I was busy building an empire, and perhaps I neglected our relationship. But as I fought this illness, you were rarely by my side. I spent nights alone with only paid nurses for company, while you were in Paris and New York, on your endless trips." My mother let out a muffled sound, a mixture of surprise and indignation. "On the video," my father continued, "Mark and David, my sons, I gave you every opportunity I never had. The best schools, connections, money. And in return, what did I receive? Mark, do you think I don't know about the money siphoned from the companies? The inflated contracts with your friends? And you, David, using family resources to support a lifestyle that doesn't match any real work?" My brothers were paralyzed, their faces alternating between shock and shame. "But Ryan," my father looked directly at the camera, as if he knew exactly where I would be watching. "You were the only one who remained. The only one who saw me as a man, not a vault. The only one who held my hand on the darkest nights, who helped me walk when my legs failed, who listened to me when I repeated the same stories because my memory was no longer the same." I felt a lump in my throat, even knowing what was coming. My father's words hit me as if I were hearing them for the first time. Therefore, in full consciousness and with complete conviction, I revoke my previous will and institute this new one. Ryan will be the majority heir to all my assets, including controlling interest in the Sterling Group companies. Eleanor will receive a lifetime monthly pension, as detailed in the document. Mark and David will receive a minority percentage of the shares but with no decision-making power and a monthly allowance compatible with their needs, not their luxuries. He paused to breathe, visibly tired. This is my final decision, not out of revenge or resentment, but for justice. Because I know that Ryan will preserve what I built with so much sacrifice. Because I know he has the character I always tried to instill in all of you. He looked directly at the camera again. Son, I know you will do the right thing. Not for me, but for the legacy we built together. The video ended, leaving the room in a deep, heavy silence. It was David who finally broke it, with a bitter laugh. Congratulations, Ryan, he said, clapping slowly. Always the saint, weren't you? The perfect son. Well, I hope you're satisfied now. This isn't over, my mother said, standing up. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. We will contest this will. Charles was clearly not of sound mind. The illness, the medication. Eleanor, Mr. Davison intervened. I must warn you that any contest would be extremely difficult. Mr. Sterling took every legal precaution. The video, the witnesses, the timing of the signature, everything was meticulously planned to avoid any questioning. He's right, Mom, said Mark, surprisingly calm now. He had always been the more pragmatic of the two. Dad got us. End of story. My mother turned to me, her eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and fear. Fear of losing everything she thought was already hers. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? That's why you stayed by his side, playing the devoted son. It was all a plan to take what was ours. I kept my expression neutral, remembering my father's advice once more. Dignity above all. No, Mom. I stayed by his side because he was my father and he was dying. The rest was his decision. Mr. Davison closed his laptop and began to put the documents in his briefcase. I suggest everyone take a few days to process this information. We will schedule a formal meeting next week to discuss the details of the transfer of assets and responsibilities. He headed for the door, but stopped beside me. Ryan, can we talk in private tomorrow? There are many details we need to address. I nodded, watching as he left. The room was heavy with silence for a few moments, until David also stood up. Well, I guess that concludes our little family meeting. If you'll excuse me, I need a drink. He left without looking back. Mark lingered, studying me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Finally, he sighed deeply. He was right about us, you know? About me, at least. I thought he'd never find out. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture very much like our father's. What are you going to do now, Ryan? Throw us out on the street? No, I answered honestly. I'm going to respect his wishes. You'll have what he determined. No more, no less. Mark nodded slowly, as if expecting that answer. You were always the best of us, weren't you? Maybe he made the right choice after all. With that, he too left, leaving me alone with my mother. She remained seated, staring at the empty table in front of her. Suddenly, she seemed much smaller, much older. The mask of control and sophistication she always wore had completely crumbled. 26 years, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. 26 years married to your father. I built my entire life around him, gave up my career, my dreams, and now I have nothing. I didn't respond immediately. It was hard to feel sympathy for her after everything that had happened, after how she had treated me. But it was also hard to ignore the genuine vulnerability she was showing for the first time in years. You have exactly what Dad wanted you to have, I said finally. Security for the rest of your life, a comfortable home. More than most people will ever have. She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. And you? What are you going to do with all this power? It was a question I had asked myself many times in recent weeks. What would I do with the companies? With the fortune, with the responsibility my father had placed on my shoulders? I'm going to honor his legacy, I replied simply, and maybe fix some things that have been broken for a long time. She gave a humorless laugh. Always the idealist, just like your father when I met him. She stood up, smoothing her dress with an automatic gesture. This isn't over, Ryan. You may have won the battle, but the war... There is no war, Mom, I interrupted gently. Just a broken family that maybe, with time and effort, can be mended. She looked at me for a long time as if seeing me for the first time. Then, without another word, she turned and left the room, her heels echoing on the marble floor like a reminder of the power she once had, and now had lost. I stood there, alone in the study that was now mine, surrounded by the books and objects my father had treasured. I felt his presence around me, as if he were watching me, waiting to see what I would do with what he had entrusted to me. I won't let you down, Dad, I promised in a low voice. Or myself. 2 days before he died, my father had asked me to visit him at his private cabin, away from the mansion, out of my mother's watchful eye. It was a small retreat in the Catskills that few knew about. He was frail, but his voice was firm. We sat by the fireplace, and he placed an envelope in my hand, telling me not to open it until after the funeral. They're going to try to erase you, he said. But I'm still your father. The cabin, built of wood and stone, had been his sanctuary for years, a place where he could escape the pressures of business and family life. I arrived there on that cold June afternoon, driving my own car along the winding mountain road. The mountain air was pure, sharp, and carried the scent of pine that my father loved so much. He was waiting for me on the porch, wrapped in a heavy blanket despite the weak afternoon sun. The cancer had taken his weight, but not his dignity. His face lit up when he saw me, a genuine smile that he rarely showed at the mansion. Son, he said, his voice stronger than I expected. Glad you came. We need to talk without prying eyes. I helped him inside and settled him near the fireplace, where the fire crackled softly. Sebastian, the caretaker who had looked after the property for decades, served us coffee before discreetly retreating. Your mother doesn't know I'm here, he commented, watching the flames. She thinks I'm at the hospital for more tests. Ironic, isn't it? At the end of my life, having to lie to have a moment of peace. I didn't reply. I never liked to speak ill of my mother, even knowing her faults. Ryan, he began, his voice taking on a more serious tone. What I'm about to tell you, what I'm about to give you, will change everything. And I need you to understand why I'm doing this. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. When I started, I had nothing. You know that. I came from a small town with a suitcase and a lot of determination. I built everything from scratch, brick by brick. The construction companies, then the developers, the logistics sector, all with hard work and, yes, some moral compromises I'm not proud of. It was rare to hear my father speak so openly about his business. At the dinner table, it was always carefully filtered stories, success without the ethical complications that every large American business empire inevitably faces. I met your mother when I was already starting to succeed. She was beautiful, ambitious, from a good but bankrupt family. We fell in love, or at least I thought we did. He paused, lost in memories. The first few years were good. Mark was born, then David. By the time you arrived, 7 years later, I was a different man, busier, more absent, but also wiser, I think. He shifted in his armchair, visibly uncomfortable. Want to rest a bit? I asked, concerned. No, he answered firmly. I don't have time to rest anymore, son. I need to finish this. He continued. Over time, I realized your mother had married the businessman more than the man. Mark and David followed her example. Family gatherings became business meetings. Birthdays, graduations, everything was an opportunity for networking, for showing off the sterling empire. And I allowed it. That's my biggest fault. My father reached out and took my hand, his thin, cold fingers gripping with surprising strength. But you, Ryan, you were always different. Remember when you were 10 and found that injured sparrow in the garden? You spent weeks caring for it, built a recovery cage, studied bird feeding. Your brothers laughed. Your mother called it a waste of time. But I saw something valuable there, genuine compassion, the ability to care about something beyond yourself. I remembered that summer, the little bird that finally flew back to freedom. It was one of the few times I saw my father truly proud of me. When I got sick, he continued, I finally had time to observe, to see clearly what I had built. A solid company, yes. A considerable fortune, no doubt. But a family? A real family? He shook his head slowly. I'm not so sure. The sun was beginning to set, casting orange shadows across the cabin. Sebastian entered silently to add more logs to the fire before retreating again. In the last few months, you were the only one who was truly present. Not just physically, but emotionally. The only one who treated me like a father, not a CEO on the verge of forced retirement. His voice faltered slightly. The only one who helped me walk when my legs failed. The only one who held my hand on the worst nights. I felt my eyes well up. Not out of self-pity or pride, but for the simple truth of his words. I hadn't done anything extraordinary, just what any son would do for his father. It was then that he took a manila envelope from the pocket of his robe. It looked heavy, sealed with red wax, an old-fashioned touch typical of my father. Inside here is my real will, he said, his voice now almost a whisper. Different from what your mother and brothers know, different from what my lawyers in New York have on file. This was made 3 weeks ago with new lawyers, independent witnesses. I looked at the envelope with apprehension. Dad, you don't have to do this. I don't want to cause more division in the family. The division already exists, son. I just didn't want to see it before. He pushed the envelope towards me. Inside, there's also a flash drive. I recorded a video explaining everything, so there would be no doubt about my sanity or my intentions. Reluctantly, I took the envelope. It felt too heavy for its size, laden not just with documents but with the weight of the consequences to come. Don't open it now, he instructed. Open it only after it's all over, after the funeral. Because knowing your mother, she'll try to exclude you from that too. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket, not knowing how prophetic his words would prove to be. We spent the rest of that afternoon talking about lighter things. Memories of fishing trips in Montauk, the time he took me to see the Grand Canyon when I was 12, the books we had read and discussed over the years. We talked as father and son, not as heir and testator. It was the most valuable gift he could have given me. When night fell and it was time to head back to the city, he hugged me with surprising strength. Remember, Ryan, he said in my ear, the true legacy isn't the buildings, the companies, or the money. It's the character you build, the good you do, the lives you touch. That was the last time I saw him truly lucid. When I returned to the mansion the next day, he was already on stronger painkillers, drifting in and out of consciousness. And 2 days later, he was gone. After being excluded from the funeral and facing my family's disdain, I remembered the envelope. I opened it alone, in the silence of my room, with trembling hands. Inside was the will, as he had said, but also a handwritten letter, a rarity in the digital age, especially for a man who commanded his companies with cutting-edge technology. My son, the letter began, written in the strong, slightly slanted script I knew so well. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and most likely things have happened exactly as I feared. Do not blame yourself. Do not grieve more than necessary. Instead, use what I am leaving you as tools, not as weapons. The letter continued, for several pages. My father explained in detail not only his decisions about the inheritance, but also business secrets that not even his closest executives knew. Strategies for the future, pitfalls to avoid, people to trust, and others to be wary of. On the last page, his writing seemed more tired, the letters less precise. Ryan, you were always my quiet pride, the son who most resembled me when I was your age, before the world hardened me. Preserve that humanity. It is rarer and more valuable than all the rest. I inserted the flash drive into my laptop. As promised, there was my father sitting in his office at the cabin recording his video will. His voice was clear, his intentions unequivocal. There was no way to contest his lucidity or his determination. When I finished watching, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. My father had given me not just his fortune, but his trust. Not just power, but responsibility. I carefully put away all the documents. It wasn't time to reveal them yet. First, I needed to fully understand what was happening at the official will reading, the one my mother and brothers expected to be final. That night I slept surprisingly well, as if a part of the burden I had been carrying since my father's death had been lifted. Not out of revenge or power, but from the certainty that I could honor his memory in the way he wished. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed. My mother no longer walked through the rooms with certainty. She spoke in whispers now, made calls behind closed doors. I heard my name on her tongue more than once, but never with kindness. My brothers avoided me completely, their eyes holding a mixture of confusion and growing resentment. One morning, I found her standing in the garden, looking at the fountain my father had built. She didn't turn when I approached. "He should have changed it back," she whispered. "He promised he would." I said nothing. There was nothing to say to a woman who had treated her son like a stranger. Her pain, if it existed, was tangled in control, not love. Before she left, she looked at me with venomous clarity. "This isn't over," she said. But it was. Not because I had won anything, but because the one person I had always wanted to understand me already had. And he had left me the final word. The clock in the living room struck 9 as I came down for breakfast. The next morning, the solid oak table where so many silent breakfasts had taken place over the years now seemed strangely imposing without my father's presence. Mrs. Davis, our cook for over 30 years, placed a cup of coffee in front of me without a word, but her eyes conveyed a mixture of compassion and curiosity. News traveled fast among the staff. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis," I said, trying to maintain normalcy. "Dad always said your coffee was the best in New York." She smiled briefly before returning to the kitchen. In the past, we would have chatted more. She would have told me about her grandson, who had just gotten into college on a scholarship my father secretly paid for. But now there was a caution in the air, as if no one knew exactly what their place would be in the new regime. I was finishing my coffee when my mother entered the dining room. She wore a navy blue silk suit, her hair impeccably styled, makeup perfect, her daily armor. But there was something different in her eyes, an uncertainty I had never seen before. "Good morning, Eleanor," I said calmly, using her first name deliberately. She hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with my formality. "Ryan," she finally replied, sitting at the other end of the table. "I think we need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Mrs. Davis appeared with another cup of coffee, which my mother accepted with a distracted nod. We waited until the cook had left again. "I spoke with Mr. Davison last night," she began, her fingers tapping lightly on the rim of her cup. "He explained the legal details of the situation. And it seems your father was quite thorough." She took a sip of coffee, buying time. "But there are still matters to be resolved, arrangements to be made." "What kind of arrangements?" Her eyes met mine directly for the first time. "Ryan, let's be practical. You have no experience running a conglomerate the size of the Sterling Group. You never took an interest in the business like your brothers. Your father may have given you legal control, but you need us, me, Mark, even David, to make this work." It was the approach I expected. Pragmatism disguised as concern. I tried to imagine what my father would do in this moment. He would probably smile that enigmatic way before turning the tables. "An interesting analysis," I replied calmly. "Considering Mark has embezzled nearly $15 million over the past 3 years through inflated contracts with his college friend, Michael Porter's construction company. and that David used company resources to fund 3 failed startups without ever properly reporting to the board. My mother's face visibly paled. How do you... Dad knew everything, I interrupted gently. He had external auditors monitoring every penny for years. It's all documented in the materials he left me. She put her cup down with excessive force, spilling coffee on the white tablecloth, a small slip in the perfect control she always maintained. You don't understand how the real world works, Ryan, she said, her voice hardening. In business, especially in this country, there are certain necessary flexibilities. Your father understood that. Yes, he did. And he also understood the difference between necessary flexibilities and abuse of trust. I kept my voice calm but firm. He left me detailed notes on every scheme, every embezzlement, every abuse. Not just from Mark and David, but from several executives, including details about that account in the Cayman Islands you think he didn't know about. That caught her off guard. The mask of composure cracked visibly, her eyes widening for a moment before she regained control. You're bluffing, she said, but without conviction. Account number 87293445111, Hamilton Trust Bank, opened in 2013 under the name Eleanor Flores, your maiden name, currently holding just over $2 million. I recited the details I had memorized from my father's documentation. Dad had friends in places you can't even imagine. My mother was silent for several seconds, her mind clearly processing this new reality. When she spoke again, her voice had a different tone, no longer authoritative but calculating. What do you want then? To expose us? To humiliate us? To destroy the family name your father built? No, I answered honestly. I don't want to destroy anything. I want to rebuild. I want to honor his legacy the right way. And what would that way be? She asked, a note of sarcasm returning to her voice. Transparency, integrity, the values he tried to teach us, but that were lost somewhere along the way. I paused, watching her reaction. Tomorrow I will have a meeting with the executive board. I will present a restructuring plan. No public exposés, no scandals. Just a quiet but thorough internal house cleaning. And, us, your brothers, me, where do we fit into your noble plan? It was a fair question. Despite everything, they were my family. Dysfunctional, corrupt, but still family. You will have exactly what Dad determined in the will. Minority shares, guaranteed income, but no management power. Mark and David can continue to work in the companies if they wish, but in supervised positions, without financial autonomy. And if we refuse? I looked directly into her eyes. Then the audits will become public. And believe me, it's not just your reputations that would be affected. There are matters in there that could interest the SEC and the Department of Justice. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with decades of secrets and resentments. Finally, my mother stood up, smoothing her silk suit in an automatic gesture. You're more like your father than I thought, she said, and for the first time it didn't sound like a criticism. That afternoon, I found Mark in the office that had been our father's. He was sitting in the leather chair, looking out at the city, skyline through the panoramic window. He didn't look comfortable there, as if the furniture was too big for him. Did Mom tell you about our conversation? I asked, standing in the doorway. He turned slowly. Mark had always been the most physically similar to my father. Tall, broad-shouldered, the same strong chin. But he lacked that presence, that natural gravity. She told me, he replied, sounding tired. So you know, about everything. I know. He let out a humorless laugh. You know what's funny? Part of me is relieved. I'm tired of pretending, of keeping up appearances. He pointed to the pictures on the wall. Photos of my father inaugurating projects, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with politicians. I always tried to be him. I always failed. I felt an unexpected compassion for my brother. Behind the arrogance and ambition, there was a boy who could never meet impossible expectations. No one could be him, I replied, entering the office and sitting in the chair opposite. Not even he was entirely the person he appeared to be. And now? Are you going? To be the new Charles Sterling? The worthy heir? No, I said simply. I'm going to be myself, and I hope you can finally be yourself too, Mark. Without the schemes, without the pressure. He studied me for a moment as if trying to detect a trap in my words. Do you really believe that? That we can change? That this family can be fixed? It was a question I had been asking myself. The damage was deep, the wounds old, but I remembered what my father had written in his letter. Use what I am leaving you as tools, not as weapons. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think it's worth a try. In the following weeks, the dynamic in the mansion gradually changed. David was the most resistant at first, threatening lawsuits and scandals. But when he realized the solidity of my legal position and the evidence I had, he reluctantly backed down. My mother alternated between attempts at manipulation and surprising moments of genuine vulnerability. One night, I found her in the conservatory, looking at an old photo album. They were pictures from the early years of her marriage, when perhaps there had been real love between her and my father. We were happy here, she said, pointing to a photo of them on the beach, young and smiling. Before the money, before the companies got so big, we were just a normal couple with big dreams. I sat beside her, seeing a version of my mother I had never known. A young woman in her 20s, hair loose in the wind, a genuine smile. What happened? I asked softly. She closed the album slowly. Life happened. Success happened. And with every achievement, we lost a piece of who we were. She looked at me with tired eyes. Be careful, Ryan. Power changes people. It changed your father. It changed me. It can change you too. It was a sincere warning, perhaps the first truly maternal act she had offered me in years. I stayed with her in silence, watching the night fall over the garden my father had personally designed. Weeks passed and the legal formalities were finalized. The house, the accounts, even the property titles. Everything was transferred exactly as my father had instructed. I didn't sell anything. I didn't kick them out. I walked through every hallway and remembered what it was like to be invisible there. Then I started to make changes. I turned his office into a reading room. I kept his old tools in the shed exactly where they were. And I built a garden behind the house, like the one he used to talk about when I was a boy. I didn't do it to gloat. I did it because I finally had the power to preserve what mattered, to protect his memory from those who only wanted his wealth. Sometimes when the wind changes, I still hear him in the house, his low, calm voice, saying he's proud. And for the first time in my life, I believe it. Not because he said it, but because he showed it, in a way only a father can. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the library that was once my father's main office. I had removed the imposing mahogany desk and leather chairs, replacing them with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable armchairs, and a low coffee table made from a single piece of reclaimed wood. The books my father kept hidden in his cabin in the Catskills, American literature, philosophy, poetry, now held a prominent place alongside the volumes on economics and law he always publicly displayed. I sat in the armchair by the window, looking out at the property's gardens. The gardeners were working on the new area I had designed, a space inspired by my father's descriptions of his grandparents' farm in Vermont. Native fruit trees, a small man-made stream, wooden benches strategically placed under the shade of maple trees. Mr. Henderson, the head gardener who had worked for the family for over 20 years, had received the project with tears in his eyes. Your father always talked about this garden, he told me. Said he'd build it one day when he had time. Time. The one thing my father, with all his money and power, couldn't buy. The sound of footsteps interrupted my thoughts. It was Martha, the new secretary I had hired to help with the transition. Mr. Sterling, the executives are in the conference room, she informed me, and Mr. Davison has arrived as well. Thank you, Martha. I'll be there in 5 minutes. When she left, I picked up the folder with the documents I had prepared over the last few weeks. The restructuring plan for the Sterling Group was ambitious, but necessary. Not just to correct the past deviations, but to steer the companies toward a future more aligned with what my father truly valued, though he rarely showed it publicly. The main conference room was on the top floor of the headquarters building on Park Avenue. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of New York City, a city for which my father had a complicated love. It's ugly, chaotic, and unforgiving, he used to say, but it has an energy I haven't found anywhere else in the world. When I entered, a dozen faces turned to me. Executive directors, vice presidents, the head of the legal department. Some had known me since childhood, others only by sight. To most, I was just the youngest son of Charles Sterling, the one who chose not to follow in his father's footsteps, the one who preferred to study literature and history instead of business or law. Mr. Davison stood up to greet me, his firm handshake conveying silent support. In the past few weeks, he had become an unexpected ally, helping me navigate the corporate labyrinth my father had built. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, sitting at the head of the table, in the place that had always been my father's. "I appreciate your presence at this extraordinary meeting. As you know, we are going through a period of significant transition following my father's passing." I paused, observing the reactions. Curiosity, apprehension, some skeptical glances. The Sterling Group was built over 4 decades by Charles Sterling. Many of you were with him from the beginning. Others joined along the way. You have all contributed to the success of our companies. Richard Grant, the chief financial officer for 15 years, cleared his throat nervously. He was one of those who knew about Mark's schemes, possibly one of the facilitators. However, I continued, a detailed audit of our operations has revealed practices that are not aligned with the core values we wish for the future of the group. A murmur ran through the room. I opened the folder and distributed copies of a multi-page document. This is the new Code of Governance and Ethics of the IOA Sterling Group. It is not a suggestion, not a public relations exercise. It is the new foundation upon which we will rebuild our operations. For the next 40 minutes, I outlined the changes: a new compliance structure, a permanent external audit, a zero-tolerance policy for ethical deviations, social responsibility, programs that went beyond the legal minimum. With each new point, I watched the expressions change, from surprise to concern, from skepticism to reluctant respect. "Some of you may be wondering why I'm doing this," I said, nearing the end of the presentation. "Why not just maintain the status quo, reap the benefits, and ignore the problems, as many would in my position?" I looked out the window for a moment, at the endless skyline of buildings. My father built this empire from scratch with determination and sacrifice. But along the way, some important things were lost. The original vision, the purpose that went beyond profit. He realized this at the end. Too late to correct it personally. That is the true legacy he left me. Not control of the companies, but the chance to restore their soul. Richard Grant cleared his throat again. "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, these changes could significantly affect short-term profits. The majority shareholders, I interrupted gently, are myself and my father's estate, and we fully approve of these changes." The meeting ended with a mixture of veiled resistance and reluctant acceptance. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be opposition, attempts at sabotage. But I also knew I had the law and the truth on my side, powerful weapons when used wisely. In the following weeks, the mansion on the Upper East Side underwent subtle but significant transformations. I didn't change the structure, respecting the architecture my father so valued, but I brought light and life to spaces that had remained formal and impersonal for years. My mother continued to live there, although she spent more time at her apartment in Paris. Mark had accepted his new position in the company, without financial autonomy, but still with a respectable title. David, after an initial outburst of anger, decided to use his share of the inheritance to start over, this time without the ethical shortcuts that had characterized his previous ventures. One Sunday afternoon, almost 6 months after my father's death, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the new garden, overseeing the installation of a wooden bench under a newly planted maple tree, when Mr. Henderson announced, "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling is asking to speak with you." I found my mother on the terrace, dressed with unusual simplicity, linen trousers, a simple white blouse, her hair tied in a low bun. She looked older, more vulnerable, but also more authentic than I had ever seen her. "The garden is looking beautiful," she commented as I approached. "Charles would have liked it." "Thank you," I replied, sitting in the chair next to her. I tried to be faithful to his descriptions. We were silent for a few moments, watching the birds that were beginning to discover the new habitat created in the garden. "I received news from Paris," she said finally. "The apartment is ready. I've decided to move there permanently." It wasn't a surprise. In recent months, our coexistence had been civil, but distant. "I understand," I replied, "but know that this will always be your home too if you ever want to come back." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decipher. A mixture of regret, reluctant respect, and perhaps a touch of pride. "You know, Ryan, I wasn't a good mother to you," she said abruptly. "I never understood why you were so different from your brothers, so much like Charles when I first met him, before everything changed." It was the most honest confession she had ever made, the closest acknowledgement to an apology I would probably ever receive. "We still have time," I replied, simply. "Things change, people do too." She nodded slowly, standing up. "I have something for you. I found it among your father's old things." She handed me a small wooden box. Inside was an old silver pocket watch, with an inscription on the back. "For my son Charles, may time always be your ally. Joseph Sterling, 1950. It was his father's, my mother explained. "Your grandfather whom you never met. Charles kept it, but never used it. He said it was a reminder of a promise he couldn't keep, to be present, to value what really matters." I held the watch, feeling its weight, imagining my grandfather giving it to my father, the hopes and dreams that accompanied the gift. "I think it's where it should be now," she concluded, "with someone who understands its true value." After my mother left for Paris, life found a new rhythm. The companies gradually adapted to the changes. Some executives left, others embraced the new philosophy. The garden flourished, attracting butterflies and hummingbirds, becoming a small oasis in the midst of New York's concrete. One afternoon, almost a year after my father's death, I received a visit from an elderly man I didn't know, Albert Johnson. He introduced himself, an old friend of my father's from the time he started in the construction business. "I came because Charles asked me to," he explained as we walked through the garden. "Before he died, he made me promise I would come check on things a year later. He wanted to know if you had managed." "Managed what?" The old man smiled, his eyes twinkling with old memories. "To balance the two worlds, business and humanity, power and compassion. That's what always challenged your father, you know? He could be brilliant in business, ruthless when necessary, but he kept that flame of decency lit, even when it was just a faint ember." We stopped under the maple tree where the bench had been installed. From there, we could see the entire expanse of the garden and, in the background, the city stretching to the horizon. "And what do you think?" I asked. "Did I manage?" He observed the garden, then looked at the house, at the subtle changes I had implemented, preserving the essence but bringing more life, more warmth. "I think you're on the right path," he replied finally. "Charles would be proud, not for the money or the power you've maintained, but for the man you are becoming." When Mr. Johnson left, I sat on the bench for a long time, feeling the afternoon breeze, listening to the sounds of the city in the distance. I took my grandfather's watch from my pocket, now restored and working. Time moved forward, constant and relentless, but also healing. Sometimes, in the quiet mornings or tranquil evenings, I felt my father's presence in the house, not as a ghost or a superstition, but as a continuity, an echo of values and hopes that transcended physical death. The true legacy I realized was not the buildings, the companies, or the bank accounts. It was the chance to do better, to learn from past mistakes, to build something that would last not just in concrete and steel, but in touched lives and preserved values. And in that understanding, I found peace. Not because I had won a family battle or proven my worth, but because I finally understood what my father had tried to teach me his entire life. That character, in the end, is the only asset that truly matters. Thank you, Dad, I whispered to the garden, to the wind, to the memory that remained alive in every choice I made. I promise not to waste what you've left me, and somewhere beyond the skyline of skyscrapers, beyond the limits of what we can see or understand, perhaps he heard. Perhaps he smiled, finally at peace, knowing that his true legacy was safe in the hands of the son who had always known him better than anyone else.